Good afternoon and welcome to week 3, session 3 of the Church Communications Strategy Training course. I am Peter Frank. I am the leader of this class. Let me get my slides working. There we go. Hopefully you can see that. My title is Senior Manager of Marketing Technology. My actual job is a variety of different things. I work with our church management software. I work with our e-commerce site. I get to be involved in digital marketing strategy pretty much all day long, and that's a lot of fun. And that's what I'm here today to share with you, not just digital, but communication strategy in general. If you have questions along the way or after the fact, you can feel free to email me at peter.frank@cph.org. I'm always excited to hear from people who are attending the class, letting me know what is important, what questions they might have. It helps me to improve both in my presentation and also in my day-to-day work. So thanks so much for being here. Let's go ahead and dig in with a few housekeeping items. As usual, I'm planning 50 minutes for presentation and 10 minutes for Q&A. I really should push that 50 minutes to 55 or 60 because I always seem to go over, and I do have a lot of material today. But I'm happy to stick with you past the normal time to answer those questions, but I know you've got things going on. So if you don't hear from me during this session, take a look at the recording later on or look for an email from me. All attendees are muted. We have a really large group of people here today, so I can't possibly have you all off mute and talking. We'll just be talking over ourselves the whole time. So you are muted, but that doesn't mean I don't want your participation. Please ask questions through the chat. If you type them in, James is on the line. He's one of my associates. He'll be happy to help you. Like I see, we've got somebody with sound problems. That happens quite a bit. We've provided a helpful resource for that to try to solve some of those problems. But if you have questions about the content, put those into the chat too. I'll be getting to those during the Q&A. Finally, we are recording this and we will be sharing the recording. So don't worry about asking for a link. You are on the list to get it. If you're here today, you're going to get that email tomorrow. And if you don't get the email tomorrow, well, then you might have unsubscribed or something. You can just shoot me an email and let me know that you didn't get it. But I'd wait till about noon tomorrow. I've been getting it out about mid-morning, sometimes a little earlier. So just know that it will be on its way. Oh, and by the way, the heading questions is the chat area. I just saw that come across from Phil. There's two different things. There is a chat and there is a questions, and I get them confused, but I think you only see the questions. All right, so just a quick review. What's included in the Church Communications Strategy Training course? Well, first off, every Tuesday from 1 to 2 Central Time, which is right now, until June 9th, we're gonna have a weekly webinar. At 2 o'clock, then I will release our new blog post, and that will be a deeper dive into the topic of the day. And then with that blog post, there will be a weekly download. Now, because you're here right now, you get access to that right away. So if you look in the handouts, the 2 previous handouts are available, as well as the one for today, which is the Journey Map worksheet. Feel free to download that now. You could download it later. We're going to be going over the details in the presentation. I'm not really going to be looking at the handout too much, but you're welcome to download that now. The schedule is after today, we're going to dig into content maps. And these first 4 are really good for both church communicators and also church leadership. Now, as we get into the last 3, those are going to be a little bit more practical advice focused on communications in general. So church leadership, you may not need to participate in those, but you're certainly welcome to. So today is Journey Maps. Now, before we go any farther, I do want to clarify one thing. These sessions provide tools for creating a strategy for your church, but they're not like a rule book that you must do every single one of these things. And you don't have to do it in the exact same way I do it, but focus on the principles of the tools and apply them as appropriate in your context, because they may need to change a little bit. Not every church is going to be able to find the same value in each tool, but some churches will really latch on to certain tools that just work. So keep that in mind. It's not like a 1, 2, 3 step process that if you miss step 2, the whole thing falls apart. The principles are what I'm really trying to teach. That's why it's about the strategy, and how you apply that in your church is going to be up to you. I also say church, but it's for any form of ministry, whether that's a church or a school or a nonprofit. We're really focused on sharing the gospel. So it is within the realm of the church at large, but in those different organizations. I'm going to run through a quick review of last week because we're going to be talking about personas and profiles a little bit today, and I don't want anybody to be left behind. So a persona is a fictional representation of your target audience, and personas will shape how you communicate, what you communicate, the means you use to communicate. That's kind of the later section of our course, and to whom. That gets into those lists, and we'll talk about those in just a moment. Now, personas should be general enough that every adult in your congregation should be able to be easily assigned to a persona. And I say easily because if you struggle with assigning somebody to a persona, then your personas may not be clear enough. They also should be specific enough that they can accurately describe how to communicate with those individual members. And there's a number of ways to divide them up, and that'll help make this a little bit more clear. So you start with your mission statement and your ministry goals, those that you are called to reach. So when you think about those audiences, start with that big picture first. And then as you break it down, you're going to have individuals divided by a number of characteristics. Now, I say the individual personas should be around 8 or fewer. If you start getting more than 8, that gets a little bit hard to manage. So personas may be identified by communication, by demographics, participation, or interests. There's other ways to divide them too. These are the ones that I like to look at. And I'm going to give some examples in just a moment. So Christ Community Church is one of our example churches. We're going to keep going back to that one more than the others, but they're a larger church in a growing suburb. Their goal is to increase attendance at summer Bible study. Well, we've defined a few personas for them: Millennial Melody, 40ish Fred, Older Adult Alice. These are divided up by demographics. Now, how you communicate with them might change because of their demographics, but really the difference is that demographics of that age range, the background. So we'll talk about them in a little while. We're also looking at St. Paul Lutheran Church, a small church in a rural city. Their goal is to increase the number of church-sponsored community-focused events. And so we're looking at their personas based on participation. Lifelong Larry, regular Rebecca, occasional Olivia. We'll look at them in a bit too. From the school side, Concordia Lutheran School is looking to increase enrollment, and their personas are based on interests. So Faithful Felicity is really interested in the faith development. Athletic Aubrey is all about the athletics and that physical activity for her kids. Curriculum Corey, he knows about curriculum, what's good. He's all about the academics. And so he's going to be focused on what your curriculum looks like. So again, these names are pretty apparent for those reasons, but you'll see that based on interest is so different than those other two. And it's also going to be different than Hope in Christ Foundation, our nonprofit organization looking to increase recurring monthly gifts. So these are all about communication preferences. They understand their audience is fairly similar. They're all passionate about homeless ministries, but how they choose to communicate is different. If Social Sarah, who prefers to be on Instagram and Facebook, Email Elliot, who doesn't even have a social media profile, but his emails still chime at him on his phone. And Visiting Victor, who he's got one of those, pay by the credit cell phones because he's not into technology. But if you visit him, you'll have a good chance of increasing his donations. All right, so those are our different personas and divided by different ways. We'll talk about them again in a little bit. But persona profiles give your personas a name, a face, personality, and a story. We shared some different examples on how you could build out those profiles. It's really creating that central source of truth for your personas. You determine the details through research and a little intuition, conversations with other people, and you build out this profile, iterate as you need to. Now, we also talked a little bit about lists. Lists are going to become more and more important as we go. Lists are groups of actual people in your audience segmented by their preferences or information, and of course their personas too. You can segment these lists in a variety of different ways, and you can always add lists as you go. For example, we have just a handful of personas here at CPH, but I've got over 700 lists down to the very nitty-gritty details that we use for communication. So lists are going to be all-inclusive or segmented down to just a few people. They're really where you're looking at your audience, and it's not about categorizing, it's about being very specific. Personas will shape the message, Lists segment the recipients. So think about it in that way. Personas are all about the message that you're sending to them and making sure that it sticks with that right kind of person. Lists are about the who. Who are you actually sending that message to? But always communicate with the persona, not the list. All right, journey maps. I love journey maps. You can see that little chess icon there. That as we look at strategy, this is where I really get excited. And there's a lot of cool visuals. I'm hoping my slide deck will be just fine as I'm streaming it. But journey maps are all about planning your ideal path. So what is a journey map? Well, a journey map is the communications equivalent of a sales funnel, except without the sales. Now, if you're not familiar with sales funnels, I'll show it to you. It looks like a sales funnel, and there's all sorts of different kinds of funnels that you can have. But you start off at the top with a very broad audience. For example, in this sales funnel, and this is the one that I like to use for our sales here at CTS, our visitors to our website. That's kind of our first step. Once you come into our website, then we have the opportunity to communicate with you in different ways. Well, the next goal is to get you to subscribe to our emails so that we can communicate with you with email. That's our most effective means here at CTS. Well, once you express some interest in what we're doing, I consider you a lead. That doesn't mean that you're ready to buy a product or anything. We're just going to keep talking with you. Something like this course puts you into that lead category. Now, it's far fewer than our visitors, and it's going to continue to get fewer. So because you're a lead, I'll continue to share information about training courses, but I'm not going to push product on you yet. That's not where you're at in this journey. Now, if you express interest in a product, we'll be happy to talk to you about it. Then you become a marketing qualified lead, meaning that we've connected you with a product based on your interest. And a sales qualified lead means you speak with one of our software consultants and you both agree that this might be a good fit. Well, when you're at that final stage and you get a contract and you're getting approval, well, you're an opportunity at that point. And finally, when you spend money with us, then you become a customer. That's a tried and true sales funnel. You can divide it up in different ways, but there's one key thing here, and that's that the dollars are at the bottom. That's the goal. Well, a journey map is similar in that it tracks the audience's actions through the completion of this entire process. That end result, your church's desired result, is there, but it's not about the money. It's about the progress. We'll clarify that in just a moment. Let me show you an example of a journey map. We're going to be looking at this in a number of different ways. Our example journey map starts on a more horizontal basis. So we have all of these actions at the bottom: attended fellowship event, attended worship for the first time, attended Bible study, started a new member class, became a confirmed member, attended worship regularly, attended Bible study regularly. These are actions that progress closer to the goal. Now, as people take actions, they might do it at a different time. It might take people a long time to go from a fellowship event to a worship event, or they may jump in at worship event first. But those actions are the ideal path. We know that we don't live in an ideal world, so it doesn't always go exactly like this, but we plan out the ideal path. The key thing, though, is what's in between. As you look at those groups in between, those people who have completed one action and are waiting to take the next one, those are what we call stages. And I'll go over this in great detail soon, but the stages, we give different names, and this becomes one more way to segment your audience. Now, this really goes into the participation division of personas, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But this is the key thing. So a visitor to your church, somebody who has attended worship, their next step might be to attend Bible study. That might be a way to introduce them into your congregation. And that communication with them is going to be very different than what you communicate with a new member. They are at different stages in the process. So that's what our topic is today. Our journey maps, which will vary from congregation to congregation, look like this in many different ways. So with the sales funnel, the emphasis is on financial success. That's what marketing people and sales people are called to do. But in a journey map, the emphasis is on progression. It's about taking that next step, not because it benefits the church, but because it benefits the person in the context of the church at large. And it's not about that financial success. It's about continuing on the mission. That's why goals are so important. That's why we talked about those the very first week, because it ties it back to Christ and what he has done for us. We're just putting it in our context for those appropriate audiences. All right, so why is a journey map important? We've already got personas. Why are we dividing up people even more? Well, it provides another point of context to help focus your communication to the right audience. But this time, rather than the people, the focus is on the timing, the appropriate timing of the relevant messages. And you'll see in the blog post today, I give an example about incorrect timing. Recently, I downloaded a PDF from a local fitness club, and I was interested in what they had to say about working out at home. And all of a sudden, I started getting phone calls a couple times a day as they're trying to recruit me to sign up. Now, I knew I'd get some emails, but I wasn't expecting phone calls every day. I wasn't at that point. I was interested in the exercises, not in committing money committing money and committing time to go to a fitness club. And so it was not the right timing for me, and I ignored the calls because it wasn't for me. Now, if they had followed up and said, you know, I'm just curious what you thought of the download, if you'd like any of our other things, then I might have answered. Even so, it was a little bit too much too soon. So that timing is so important. The other thing about journey maps is it identifies opportunities for movement within your audience. We don't want people who are just staying in the same place the whole time. We're always looking for that kind of next action. How can we help them grow deeper in their faith? Well, that's where our ministry goals come in to dictate that action. But we want to give them that appropriate next step. You're not taking them from 0 to 100. You're not saying the first time visitors should be leading a ministry. You're taking those baby steps along the way. And that really helps you focus your communication down on the right message. You don't have to send everything to everybody and hope that some of it sticks. You can get really relevant to the right people at the right time. That's where that call to action comes in. When you focus your communication on a primary call to action for each audience, you are limiting what you send them, which makes what you send them more important. By focusing down on one message, it gives them that next step that is well-defined, well-crafted, well-researched to say, this is appropriate for you. I really think you should do that. And then with the persona coming into it, you can put it within their context. Here's why I think you should do that. Now that's starting to get into content mapping, which is next week, as we really combine these ideas of personas and journey maps together. But you need this pathway forward to get that timing in for your audience. All right, so what's included in a journey map? I kind of covered this briefly, but let's dig into this with a lot more detail. The first thing is actions, the desired activities that you are encouraging your audience to complete. So this is an example. I'm going to use this example over and over again, but I don't want you to think that this is what it means to be a journey map, these specific actions. I'll give you some more examples later on, but this one makes a lot of sense to me. We kind of talked through this the first week. I think this is a fairly common journey map, at least from a mission statement standpoint, not necessarily ministry goals. But we've got this laid out. So the very first action is attended a fellowship event. When you think about, and we use a phrase in marketing called a low barrier to entry. Well, that means a really easy step to get in, you know, attending a fellowship event. What does that look like at your church? You know, maybe that is your community picnic. Maybe it's a barbecue. Our church does that quite a bit, where we have monthly barbecues. Maybe it's the Easter egg hunt. Something that is very broad, welcomes a large audience. Well, then the next step we have here is attended worship the first time. Well, worship is obviously a little bit more intimate than a fellowship event, but it's also not very committal. You'll have people coming and going all the time, and you know, we'd like them to stay, but it's not that, it doesn't take that commitment, so it's still a lower barrier to entry. Well, Bible study is a little bit more intimate. You might actually have to talk to somebody there. You might sit next to somebody and converse with them. And so it's a little bit closer to the goal. Well, then we've got Start New Member class, and that's very similar to Bible study, except it's for that purpose of becoming a member. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people don't complete that. And so that next step is saying became a confirmed member. You completed the class and you came for your confirmation. You have committed to becoming a member of the church and you've stated what you believe. Well, then the next step is attending worship regularly. And regularly is very subjective, but defining what that is. Maybe that's 2 times a month, 3 times a month. Any more, 2 or 3 times a month is really good. It used to be 3 or 4 was the standard, and now as people are busier, it's less. Well, then the last one is attending Bible study regularly. Again, this is not just that first time, but committing to studying God's word outside of the worship service. That's the goal, at least, of the example church we're using. But it gives you some context to kind of some standard actions throughout this. Now, those actions will look different for your church, especially depending on your goal, and we'll look at some examples in just a moment. But your goals may end up on multiple places on the map. So maybe you have a goal about attending worship, and there's 2 goals. One is about increasing the number of people who have attended worship, and one's about increasing the regular attendance, going from 2 times a month to 3 times a month as an average. So they might align on the same map. They might not. We'll talk about that soon too. But your goals should have some connection to a journey map. Now, these stages, these are the important parts. These are the placement of the individuals between actions. It says what they've already done and what they should do next. And I've got it really nice and clean here, and I can guarantee it won't be as nice and clean in reality. But again, this is an ideal path. This is not the only path. So don't get too hung up on, well, somebody jumped in step 4. Well, that's okay. So we've got them, and I've given them names, and the names are, again, subjective, but they help keep us all talking the same language. Now, again, I'm not talking about these names, but at your church, defining names for those stages will really help you. So I put prospect, visitor, potential member, pre-member, new member, and engaged member. And again, these can be whatever you want that are appropriate for that context, usually looking at what that past action was, or maybe, like pre-member, what that next action is. So stages become almost like additional personas for your communication. And I say almost like because you're not building out an entire persona. Personas go into far more detail about the type of person, where in this case, these stages are about actions, being between actions. What's that next step? Now, you could have all sorts of different types of people in those stages, but it's that next step that you have laid out. It's not based about who they are and where they're coming from. This is a little bit more about your ideal path than anything else. Well, how do we go about creating a journey map? Well, the first thing, like I mentioned, is you start with your mission statement. That defines your desired baseline of operations. Again, this is a critical part of it. They're not going to vary too much from church to church because we are all called to share the gospel with all people. Baptize all nations, that great commission. But your context is going to distinguish your church from the church down the street. The strengths that you've identified through the SWOT analysis will be a little bit different than the strengths of the church down the street. So look at your church. What are you equipped to do? And what then becomes your desired baseline of operations. You start at the end and work your way backwards to identify the actions that led to that point. When you think about the people who have recently completed that final action, what steps did they take? I'd be cautious not to look just at your own situation, you personally, because it's going to be different. But if you talk to some of the people in your congregation who are at that final stage, ask them how they got there. There's going to be some key events that brought them to it. Now, actions should be about what the person is doing, not what God is doing in their life. And we talk about that some in the blog post that I'll be sharing later on. But think about this from a very logical perspective. It's based on what's happening today. If somebody talks about, well, we had a I had a grandmother who was so influential in my faith, and after she passed away, I decided to start going to church again. Well, that's a great story. That doesn't make a good action on a journey map, because that's not necessarily repeatable. Sure, it's an outward action. So think about things from a more logical perspective of what could be repeated, what could be a little bit more common, what can be influenced by things today, not by long-term relationships and people outside the church. These actions should be the ideal path to the desired result, but they're not always going to follow that ideal path. So put on your rose-colored glasses and think about, if everything went well, this is how it would go. It'd be this easy. We know that's not the case, but we can't plan for every possible situation. So we're looking at that ideal path. So let's go back to our friends at Christ Community Church, that larger church in the growing suburb as we define them. The actions on the journey map for them. Well, we're starting at the very end and working our way backwards. So again, we went through these. I won't go through them again, but that final one, based on their goal of increasing Bible study attendance, is to attend Bible study regularly. That, putting in the past tense. Once they've hit that goal, they've attended Bible study regularly, then they have, met that criteria. So if you are looking at your ministry goals to see if they're on that same map, in this case, increase active participation, well, yeah, that's going to be on there, right there at the end. We've kind of designed it that way. Well, what is required to achieve that goal? Well, becoming a member of the congregation, we're only focused on members right now, not just attendance, but attendance of members. And, if they're a member and they're just attending Bible study, that's not really where we want them to be. We want them to be regular in worship first. So maybe they're attending Bible study, but they're avoiding worship. Well, they haven't really met all of the criteria that we're looking for. We want these people to be engaged in all aspects. Bible study is certainly after worship. And then they've attended more than one Bible study. I mean, that's just the basic math of it, that regular attender. So yeah, we have those on there, but we have those other steps that led to it. So you'll see those first few steps are bringing them into the door and getting them into that membership status. So they're still important. We don't throw those away. But at least with this ministry goal, we've identified where it's at on our map, and we're in good shape. Well, if your goals aren't on the map, decide if they can be added or if a new map should be created. So unlike personas, where you really only want one persona per person, you don't want somebody in both of those pools, you might have multiple maps, and your personas would be working on the same map. I'm going to give you some examples in a moment. But the goals, if they're that different, if they, you don't want to shoehorn them into the map, you might need a different map, and that map may only last for the same time period of your goals. So think about a capital campaign. That's usually a set amount of time, and your church should not revolve all around that capital campaign. There's far more going on in your church than that, specifically receiving the gifts of God and worship. So you don't want to only do your ministry goals, but if you had that path on with worship and regular attendance, I don't think it's the right thing to put contributing to the capital campaign at the very end. And that makes it seem like it supersedes, or at least in terms of importance, supersedes worship. And that's not the case. So you put them on parallel tracks, or at least separate tracks. Again, I'll show you some examples. But as you're doing this, if you're looking at your ministry goals and you're saying, these really do align, but not perfectly, you might be missing some steps. Or maybe you just change your steps a little bit to say, well, these are really close, but if I switch this one here to this action, then they're just right. So this process is an ongoing process. It's gonna take some work. That's why it's so important to have those goals and that mission statement understanding figured out first, to see what actions you are encouraging your audience to do. All right, then after that, you're going to identify and name the stages between those actions. So again, these are the stages that we put together, and they're really the part that's most important. The actions influence the messaging, but these stages are where you group people. And so as you look at, let's say, those potential members, these are people that have said, I'm kind of interested in Bibles, or interested in becoming a new member. They've attended Bible study. They've got that potential there. They've shown that they'll worship and they'll study God's word. Those are great candidates for membership. So when you have a new member class starting up, who are you going to go to first? Well, it's going to be these people. You don't want to go to the engaged members because they're already members. And you don't want to go to the prospects that attended a fellowship event because you don't even know if they're interested in attending worship, much less becoming a member. But those potential members, those are the right ones. And of course, the pre-members, those are the ones you're going to want to talk to about confirmation. You don't want to talk to the potential members about that yet because they haven't even started the class. You're putting the cart before the horse. So again, it goes into that timing and having the right message at the right time. The stages are to whom you communicate. The actions are what you encourage them to do. We talked at the very beginning of this session about how a lot of having a strategy is determining what not to do. So if we look at these different actions that are on there, there's a lot we can communicate, but we don't want to communicate that with everybody. It's the right message for the right group. And so we are asking the prospects to attend worship and the visitors to attend Bible study and so on and so on. You're putting the right message with the right people at the right time. Doesn't mean you're never going to invite them to join the new member class or attend worship regularly, encourage them to make that a habit. It just means you're not going to do that right now. And so that really gives you some relief from that pressure of, oh man, this person, we've got to get them moving, and say, well, let's just get them on that next step. Let's focus one step at a time. Now, I mentioned before that this is the ideal path. It's nice and clean. Guarantee you there's going to be some more complex journey maps. And this is you can really dig yourself into a hole thinking about all the different scenarios. So I want to caution you, always kind of keep your head up a little bit and see the big picture. But there can be some more complexity in the journey maps than what I just showed. So this is the simple one we've been looking at. Straightforward, a single line, single actions, stages are all set. Well, you might have more actions than that. You might have several actions that move them from one stage to the next. So your stages are just fine, but you're going to identify multiple actions. So maybe an engaged member is not just somebody who attends Bible study regularly, but they might attend the small group regularly. So you're looking at it from the Sunday mornings with pastor leading it to the Tuesday evenings at someone's home. Or maybe they're the ones leading a ministry group. They might be really active in youth ministry. They don't have time to be attending the large group Bible study because they're leading the youth Bible study. You don't want to say they're not an engaged member because they didn't attend the large group Bible study. You have to look at the situation, and it's going to be different for every church, but I would guess that most of you will start going down this path of having more than one action per stage, or per next stage, I should say. Now, I mentioned this before, you might have multiple journey maps. So if your church has a school associated with it, and some of your ministry goals are tied to school, it's going to be really hard to align those. Those are very different people. And your personas might end up just on being on different maps. Or you might have a persona on both maps. Somebody who is a prospective family at your school might also be a visitor at your church. You can be more than one thing. Now, that persona is going to be pretty similar. When you look at it, if maybe they're the preschool persona, you'll interact with them different ways for different goals. These aren't conflicting by any means. They're just different. And so you might have different paths. Now, I used a more extreme example of church and school, but you might have different paths at the church. So there's the definition of having multiple paths. There's the next one, which is a merged journey map. So you might start off in different ways, but then come together. So if you're looking here, like a school family might end up being in a new member class with a non-school family. They came in at different ways, but ultimately they ended up on the same path for that same goal. And so those will kind of be based on your personas. Going all the way back to that SWOT analysis, what are some of your strengths? Well, you might be really good at reaching your community, and you might be really good at growing your school. And so both of those end up growing your church. Well, that's okay. On the flip side, get my animation going, you might have a split journey map where your goals are at the end and they're very different. You'll have different personas, but they start at the same spot. You know, maybe attending family Sunday school is one goal and Bible study regularly is another. And well, you start off by bringing them into your church, but you split them off in different ways from there. And that's okay too. Now, it's also possible that you'll have the same person at different stages at that split, because it's almost like having two different journey maps after a certain point. So I'll caution you not to get too down in the weeds, and I'll show you some examples. The one that I put together for CTS is rather complex, and you don't have to go that route, but this can be a lot of fun. And so as you think about these things, start mapping it out. What should it look like? That's when it starts to become, if you have some graphic design skills, or if you're like me and you think you have some graphic design skills, but you don't actually, you can really go and spend a lot of time doing this. But I have fun with it, thinking about visualizing this information in different ways. And I'm just going to share a couple examples right now. The one that we have, I like to call the linear landscape. It's just going across the landscape. You see that in a very horizontal manner. Everybody has a specific spot. But you could kind of flip it on its head 90 degrees and do the what I call linear portrait. It's not quite the sales funnel. The sales funnel is taking a large group and bringing it down to a small group, understanding that each time you move down, you're going to have a different number, a lesser number of people. Whereas the linear portrait says, well, we're going to have different numbers at each one. And if the focus is on progression, then it doesn't really matter how many I have in each one. It's about the people that are in there and moving them to the next step at the right time. So we've got a few different options in there. And this is what the handout looks like. And the handout looks like this because this is the easiest one to put into a worksheet. As you start looking at the one we had before, that's very much more designed. And so I didn't want to say, well, limit it only to those 7 groups or 7 actions. This is just an example. This is a good starting place for you with the linear portrait, but how it ends up will really vary depending on what yours looks like. Now, there's another one that I call the multi-layered map. This is our CTS journey map, and it is kind of complex. Now, what I have done is those individual icons are actions along the way. And I put some different notes in there, and I put some different data points in there, all of that. This might be considered trade secrets, so I'm going to blur it out. And when you get the slide deck, it'll be blurred, but it'll give you kind of an idea. So I don't want to give away too much on here. Some of my bosses may not be pleased with me showing all of it. So I'll just leave it at that so that you can get an idea of what it looks like. But you can see that there's splits and there's merges and there's a variety of different ways to start. That's where it's a multi-layer map. So depending on how complex your goals are, how many goals you have, you might end up with something that looks like this. Now, I've kept those stages in there so that I know exactly what stage each person is at, and they very much align with the sales funnel. But as I apply communications to it, the principles are exactly the same. So I hope that makes sense. And if you're looking for more ideas, go on Pinterest or Google image search, put in customer journey map. You're going to find more for customer journey map than audience journey map. There are some really cool ideas out there. And some of them are very visual, meaning they will take a graphic designer to put together. But I find that looking at other people's examples, even if they're completely outside what I'm doing, really helped me think about, well, how would I do that? And as I think about how would I visualize that, I start thinking about, well, there's these actions that they need to be included in that too. Or, well, this doesn't fit this action that I've already had on my map. So it really gets those creative juices flowing and thinking about what is going on in our reality. And I guarantee you, your map is going to look different than somebody else's. Even if you are in similar contexts and have similar goals, every church is different. And it's going to look different based on your priorities. All right, so let's dig into some of our examples. We got a few more minutes left. I do want to remind you that you can put some questions in the chat and I'll answer them during our Q&A. So we'll go to our example churches. This is where we start to apply personas to the journey map. And this is really a kind of a preview to next week, when that's specifically what we're going to be looking at, is how do you combine these two concepts, personas and journey maps. Well, first off, Christ Community Church, remember we divided the personas based on demographics before. So you've got the millennial Melody, the 40-ish Fred, the older adult Alice, all of these are based on ages. So we've divided our church up by those age groups, and we might have a few more to fill in those gaps. But for example purposes, we've got those three. Well, if you look at the journey map that we've put together, the standard one we've looked at over and over again, where do those personas fit in? Well, honestly, they all fit in, because regardless of what demographic they're in, they can start at the beginning and slowly work their way across. And they may enter at different points, but those actions really aren't going to change. It doesn't matter if you're an older adult Alice or a millennial Melody. We still want you to attend worship. We still want you to attend Bible study. You have to become a confirmed member. All of those steps are still the same. Now, this is where we'll start to get into it next week with the messaging. How you communicate to a pre-member millennial Melody and how you communicate with a pre-member older adult Alice will be different. They're the same stage, you're encouraging the same action, but the how and the where and the what, the phrases that you use, the reasons that you give, the platforms that you distribute those messages will change because of the persona. So we're not throwing persona out and saying, well, everybody who needs to become a confirmed member gets the same message. You're adding more context to it. All right, let's look at a different example. So here's Concordia Lutheran School. These are the ones where they're based on different interests. Felicity is focused on the faith development. Aubrey's focused on the athletics, and Corey's focused on the curriculum. As we look at this journey map, you'll see that it doesn't really matter what their interests are in terms of those next steps. So I've got this put out here where the first step is to subscribe to email updates, then request a school info packet, register for a school tour, attend the school tour. That difference between those who say they're coming and actually are coming is going to be different. You register for your student for preschool, you attend the first week, and then that last step is that you recommend it to everybody else. So we've named these different groups, and as we look at our personas, well, they are all going to go through that same path. There's nothing that we want curriculum Corey to do that athletic Aubrey shouldn't also be doing. That's going to be consistent. But again, the how we go about doing it for each person is going to change. And so that's, again, we'll get into that next week. One more example where it's going to be the same, the communication preferences. So this is our Hope in Christ Foundation, the funder of homeless ministries in our local urban center. They're all about getting to that reoccurring gift. That's their goal. Well, we've got several more of these. Now, what you might end up finding is that if you have some things like they're subscribed to email updates, then maybe somebody jumps ahead. And in fact, I don't think I did that, but I probably should have done that with our visiting Victor. I can even do that on the fly real quick. I may not spend the time doing it. But as you think about, whoops, I'll move him over just a little bit so you can see that. All right, so as you look at putting your personas in there, you might start Victor later on. In fact, he may even be coming much later than that. He might just show up as an attendee. And so as you put him in there, oops, they're going a different path, starting a little bit later because of that first step being about communication. But really, you're still trying to get them all the way to that end goal. Now, this next one, and I'll leave this up here on the screen actually for a quick second to talk more about those actions. You'll notice those actions at the bottom. We go from communication to events that occur down to contributions. And I used a different verb form there. I should have kept it all in the past. I apologize for that. But These are all the actions that the individual has taken. And again, that's that consistent thing throughout here. This is about what your audience is doing, not what you're doing with them, not what your actions are. You're encouraging their actions. We're going to get into that quite a bit more next week, but I want to make that clear because especially as we get into St. Paul Lutheran Church, this is the one where our personas are based on participation. Our small church in a rural city, their goal is to get in their community more. They've been there long enough. They should probably start getting to know their community through some quarterly events. So as you look at what they're doing, this goal, or this map, is probably not their only map because it's very focused on these community events. And so while they might have a similar map for their mission as Christ Community Church, they've got a different map for how are we going to do these community events. So you're going to encourage people to subscribe to email updates. They're going to download a community related community content. Maybe you've got the top 10 things to do in our small city. They're going to request additional information about the community event. They're going to sign up and say, I'm going for it. They're going to actually attend. And then, because we have these quarterly events, maybe next time they're going to volunteer for it. And then maybe ultimately they end up leading it. Now, you're also going to have people in your congregation who are never going to be too far back because they're already planning on being there. So if you look at them, they're going to start at different stages. Regular Rebecca is definitely going to be a volunteer. Lifelong Larry, he might need some convincing to go to this, but he definitely doesn't need to know about the community. He's lived here his whole life. And then occasional Olivia. Oh, so he's going in that shortened path. Rebecca's already there. You're communicating with her differently, but then Olivia will start at the beginning. And so you map them out in different places because of what their persona is. Their persona aligns with the journey map. And so your messaging to those will definitely change because that whole group is based on that journey map and being farther ahead. So most of them are going to be pretty similar in that the personas are going to go the whole length. But in some cases, when you're really tied in with activities, you might have to start at those different places. All right, I hope that's making sense. I kind of stumbled over that one a little bit. It's a concept that I think is important, but it's not that easy to explain. All right, let's talk about how this actually looks with real people. When you start looking at the individuals in your congregation, just like we did with assigning them to a persona, you're going to look at assigning them to a specific stage or identifying really what stage they're in. It's less about what you're doing, but you're recognizing what they do. So that's the question. How do I know which stage each member should be positioned in? Well, I talk about this quite a bit in the blog post. This is where I really honed in to say, this is the practical help that I can't complete in our webinar here, but I'll give you a few starting points. The dynamic data generated from your church management center software, or your marketing platform, or both, is really going to inform their actions. So you think about what's included in those things. You might have the people who signed up for emails. You might have your membership information in there. That may be through your marketing platform, the forms that you create for registering for events. Your regular attendance will be tracked in your church management software. Your offerings, your Bible studies will be in there. You'll have this real data to say, this person has gone through these different steps. And because the data is in there, you can start just getting those groups together. So at my church, we put together a very similar map for specifically visitors and saying what stage are they in leading up to new member class. And then of course we had our groups that were kind of outside that, those different stages, they're already a member. Well, we put those in as a single select kind of thing where you can only assign one value. We made them all mutually exclusive. You're either in the new member class or you're not, but you've expressed interest, or you haven't expressed interest, but you've attended worship, or you haven't attended worship yet, but you came to a fellowship event, those kind of things. So based on actual data, you can assign people to those different stages. Or it might be static data, depending on how you go through it. It might be that you have a list from sign-up sheets, or maybe you talk to people. Like if one of your stages is expressed interest in becoming a member, well, that's a conversation. That's okay too. And maybe all of it is just conversations. Maybe it's, you're not using digital tools at all, and you're just kind of thinking through here, and you're saying, okay, who has suggested this to me, or said, yes, I want to sign up. If you're a small church, you don't necessarily need to dig into all the data. You're going to know the 30 people or so. And so you really become contextualized and say, I'm not going to send a letter inviting everybody in the church because I've got these 10 people who have already told me they're signing up. So I'll just mark them as a yes, and I know they're going to be here. So I'll focus on the other 20 people. That's a very small situation. But again, it goes to your context. The goal is not to give people the message that is wrong for them. That's not at the right time, especially if they've already completed that action. So there's a number of other examples that I put in that blog post that'll be releasing in about 9 minutes. But I want to address some common questions right from the beginning, because I know I'm going to get these. I haven't looked at our questions yet on my screen, but I'm guessing some might be here. So what if somebody doesn't enter the journey map at the right place? Maybe they're in one of those examples where the persona really could go all the way across, but this one individual decides to just call up your church before they move and say, I'd like to join your congregation. You might be the only Lutheran church around, and so they know they're going to join you because they're moving to that area. Well, okay, communicate with them where they're at. That's fine. They don't have to follow the ideal path. You just need to identify where they're at on that path. And so they might jump in well later than you would expect them to. What if you have somebody who never desires to take the next action? We've got some people at our congregation who attend faithfully, but they are not members. They leave during the last hymn. They don't want to become members. We know very little about them. We get their attendance card, so we know their name and we know how to contact them so that we can tell them, hey, church is closed during the coronavirus. Watch us online. We can do that, but they've made it very clear they don't want to be members. Okay, care for them where they're at. Understand that. You might want to flag them in your system to say they're in this stage, but they don't want that next step. Exclude them. It's okay to not invite them over and over again to that action that they said they don't want. How annoying is that when you think about dealing with businesses where you're like, sign up for our emails, sign up for our emails. No, I don't want to sign up. Sign up for emails. It really puts a bad taste in your mouth. You may want to buy their product, but you don't need to sign up for their emails. That's okay. Care for them where they're at. Remember, we're dealing with people. We're talking about contextualizing the message. The people are more important than our journey map. Put it into that context. All right, what if someone takes an action that we aren't tracking? We looked at an example where you have multiple actions per stage. But what if somebody takes an action that we know moves them into the next stage, but we're not tracking that? Well, okay, decide if it's important, and if so, move them along on the journey map. Maybe add that action for next time. Start tracking it. Again, use this for as good as it is for your congregation and for your ministry. It doesn't have to be exact every time. It's about getting to the right message. The journey map is a tool along the way. It guides the communication by providing context, but use them as they are helpful. Don't use this as a kind of a law-based approach. This is about communicating in the right way. It's about not communicating things that are not helpful, excluding people from those communications that aren't relevant for them. It's not about saying, well, you got to follow these steps. And the whole thing is steps. That's why I'm emphasizing this so much, because it's so easy to say, well, let's put them in a nice, neat row and always have them do those next things. If you're kind of a control freak like me, that's what you want. But it's important to remember it's about them and the message, not about our journey map. The journey map helps us get to the right message to them. All right, so we'll move into our TLDR, too long didn't read. What are the key items for today? Well, journey maps are important because they provide the context of timing for your audience. Your desired results, your mission or your goals, or both, dictate the actions. And the stages of your journey map segment your audience, segmented even further than personas, because Stages have that aspect of time. Personas have that aspect of people, who they are, what they're like, and you can combine those. That's what we're going to get into next week. So if you want to dive deeper into this topic, take a look at our blog in about 5 minutes using journey maps to identify next step communications. And we'll talk about what kind of data you can track. We'll talk about why timing is so important. I put a few stories in there. I'd be curious to see what you think, if those blog posts are helpful or not. The download today is pretty simple. I wanted to make it more complex, but I couldn't think of a way. Complex sounds wrong. I wanted to make it more detailed. I couldn't think of a way to make it more detailed without it being less helpful. So take a look at that. It's available in the handout section of your GoToWebinar panel. You should be able to download it. If not, tomorrow I'll be sending a link directly to it. You won't have to fill out the form or anything, so you might have to be patient. Or you can go to the bottom of our blog post, fill out the form, and you'll get it. We'll get it to you. I'm not worried about you guys signing up for it. It's all a matter of timing. All right, lastly, if you haven't signed up for our Facebook group, I encourage you to do that. It's a really quick access way. I haven't been as diligent in posting questions. It's just been really busy around here. So feel free, if you have questions for me or others in the group, I'd love to see that communication. Go ahead and put it out there and say, hey, what do you guys think about this? I've gotten some really good questions over email. Feel free to put those out to the group. I'd love to hear what people are thinking, actually communicating with each other, sharing best practices. So the link is on there. You can also just search Facebook for Church Communication Strategy Training Course, and you'll be able to join the group. It is a closed group. I don't want people coming in and spamming. I have to approve the people that come in. I do that so that I can kick you out if you're putting in advertisements. But so far, we haven't had any problems with that. So please feel free to join, completely free. All of this is completely free. All right, somebody just said my sound went off, but I think I'm seeing it, so I didn't actually accidentally pull the plug. But if anybody else is having trouble, you'll probably let me know. Next week, another fun topic. This is content maps, aligning your message. This is where we take everything that we've already done and put it into one single map and say, these are our primary messages. So we got a little bit of work to do before we get into that content map. We're going to talk about message mapping, something that many of you I'm sure are familiar with, but that's that end goal, is we'll get into content maps. It's hard to believe that next week is May 19th, but that is the date. We will be back here at 1 o'clock Central Time. While I take a drink, I'm going to take a look at the questions. If you have not asked your question yet, please go ahead and put it in there, and I will be answering them in just a few minutes. Thank you again to James for answering those technical issues and anything else that has come up. All right, well, it does look like a number of people had issues seeing the PowerPoint. I don't think everybody did, because I don't have everyone chiming in on the questions saying they can't see it, but I will be sharing it later on, and the recording will have it too. So I do apologize if you couldn't see it. That's one of those weird things about GoToWebinar, is that it'll put different displays out depending on your computer, depending on if you're accessing on the web or downloading the GoToWebinar panel. All right, Lori said, when doing personas by communication, I feel like you still need to break that down further by demographic, right? Well, Lori, it really depends on your goals. So let's go back to the example, Hope in Christ Foundation. The goals here are rather static. It's all about the financial side of things. And so as you look at these example steps, you might need to break it down by demographics. But does it really matter if visiting Victor is an older gentleman like right here? It could be that the person who's in visiting Victor is a 20-year-old female who looks more like Social Sarah's picture, but acts like visiting Victor and doesn't do social media, doesn't do email, really cares about those personal visits. Well, then demographics really doesn't matter. So that primary way you're basing it is, that distinguishing your personas is really what you're looking at. And if demographics plays an important role of your personas, then you may want to go out that way and have multiple personas with communication preferences in them. So I don't want to say that communication preferences always needs demographics, but it might in your situation. So yeah, you're thinking digital versus non-digital communications. Well, there are some people who, demographics really don't matter to them in terms of their communication preferences. I know some people who are in their 70s who are on social media all the time, and that's the best way to reach them because it's always there. All right. So I'm going to keep going past these technical issues. Warren is asking the question, how do you plan journey maps for lapsed members who might have traveled along the map but are now all over the place? Well, I should have clarified this. Because it's based on actions, and if your actions are habitual, as we look back at some of them, let's go to our standard one here. As you look at these personas, it doesn't matter exactly where they're coming in, but if they used to attend Bible study regularly and now you haven't even seen them in 3 years, they may be all the way back at that beginning stage, or maybe there's a separate stage that has dropped them out. And your next step is to get them back into new member, or into that kind of new member stage so they attend worship regularly. That might be that split in the roadmap or in the journey map like we talked about before. That's where I think as you start to look at some like this multi-layered map, I'll take it off blur for a quick second, you might have different paths. You might have a path that says go back there. Now that's not the ideal path. It's about getting those people into the right stage so that your messaging is correct. So I hope that helps a little bit. Pastor Schrank is asking if I can give an example of my church's journey map. Well, I don't have the specific journey map laid out. What I can do, as we've communicated back and forth about my church, we are still at the earlier stages of this process. It's been fun to interact with the people in my church and talk about these concepts and have them applied in different ways, but we're not quite at that point yet where we're communicating in this way. We don't have a communications team. We're talking about this at that leadership level. In fact, last night at church council, we had a number of discussions that really revolved around personas. Whereas we talk about ministry goals for the next year, that starts to get us closer to that. But I can put in the Facebook group those steps that we track, because it's not a visual journey map, but it's very much a journey map for visitors. And I'd be happy to share those. I've shared them in other training webinars too, because they're not proprietary or anything like that. It doesn't give away any information. It's just the way that we track them. It's one way that we group our whole audience together. So I'll take a note and put that, well, I won't take a note because I don't have a pen by me, but I'll make sure to share that in the Facebook group probably tomorrow morning then. All right, Karen is asking, in this presentation, is a step the same thing as a stage? If not, what is the difference? Well, a step is the action that a person in your audience takes. The stage is where they are at between actions. So for example, a potential member is between the steps of attended Bible study and starting the new member class, meaning that we call them a potential member because they've already completed the previous actions or steps. But the next step for them is to start new member class. And once they start that, they move into the pre-member stage. So they're sequential. You move from a step into a stage. After you take that next step, you're in the next stage. So I hope that helps clarify it a little bit. Who and how do you track progression of people through the journey? Well, I talked a little bit about the how. The blog post will explain it more, but I think the who is a really interesting question. Who should be doing this? Well, it's really the people who have the information, the people in your church office or volunteers. Now, I'm a volunteer at my church, and I'm involved in the data, but not on a regular basis. So our assimilation director spends a lot of time tracking that, especially with those new members. That's what she's there for. But we have different people who enter in attendance information, and that generates dynamic lists. And so as an elder, I can easily pull up the lists of those regular attenders or those people who aren't attending filter it down by my district and see. So the who is going to vary. It can be a lot of different people, but it also depends on the tools that you're using, who has access to those. Mark is saying, is this type of illustrating what a smartboard is used for? Well, it could be. A smartboard is used for a number of different things, but being able to drag and drop and reposition, all of that stuff, smartboards have a lot of great tools for it. The smartboard hardware itself really just allows you to physically interact with the computer screen without the use of a mouse. But you can do the same thing with any computer screen or tablet. I'll be honest, my favorite tool to map out journey maps is Excel, Microsoft Excel. And that's because you can drag cells and move them around. And so you can really get into a kind of a playground sort of thing and stage everything appropriately and make tweaks and adjustments real easily. But you could use Microsoft Word, you could use PowerPoint. PowerPoint has some really cool graphics that you can apply to it. Some of the things that I put together, like, this very next slide. This is just using PowerPoint's template for this kind of visual art. What do they call it? I forget the exact word that PowerPoint uses. I think they call it smart art, actually. Yeah, PowerPoint, insert. Yeah, smart art is what they call it in PowerPoint. So number of different tools. Smart boards certainly are one way that you can do it. Well, Jackie's already left, but she said, for goals and journey maps, is there a way for different boards to take responsibility to evaluate the actions and stages for them? Absolutely. I think you need to explain the concept to them first, so they know what they're doing. But if a board or if a different board or a ministry team, whatever you call them, is really owning that goal, then they're the best ones to do that. And if your mission ties into, the stewardship of time and resources, well, then the stewardship team might be a good one to define what they see as the best steps. Now, your communication team will use that to communicate, or if you don't have a whole team, whoever's doing your communication can use what they put together and certainly should be able to provide some input. But yeah, I think it depends on what that end result is, who should be leading that. All right, let's see. So Jeremy's saying, and I'm going to read this as I say it out loud, is this all speculative at this point? What kind of things give us a good idea that a hypothetical person would actually move through the map or fall off? If all the personas can fit into all the parts of the map, how do the personas in the map show their usefulness? For example, if everything applies to everyone, does nothing apply to no one? Getting pretty philosophical there. I think after next week, you're going to see it in a little bit more detail, but let me go ahead and pull up this example again. And your question came in around 142. I don't know if I'd shown this yet, but the messages that are communicated with the different people will be done with a combination of the persona and the stage on the journey map. And so again, like you're saying, if somebody falls off or doesn't actually move through the map, that will change things, but that's where it comes down to those actions. These actions that I put here, and these personas are pretty general and I think relatable. So let's talk about a millennial Melody. When you are trying to explain to millennial Melody why she should join the new membership class, if you're looking at that millennial persona, stereotypically millennials are not joiners. You see that in all sorts of organizations, whether it's in the church or in the private sector, outside of the church, they're just not joining anymore because their lives are so busy. They want to be able to come and go as they please. Whereas somebody like an older adult Alice is of that generation who joined things. That's how you built community and fellowship. So when you encourage them to join your church, your messages can be different and contextualized to the person. You don't want to put a blanket email out that says, we know you're so busy, but the new membership class will provide you a deeper understanding of your faith. Because older adult Alice will read that and say, I'm not busy, I'm retired. I haven't been busy in years. Whereas millennial Melody will say, yeah, I understand. You get me. You understand that I'm busy. And so again, it goes down to that message. The person or the persona is going to understand things differently if you distinguish your personas correctly. Now that's just one example, and I could give some others, but I hope that gives that kind of that baseline knowledge. And then next week, that's what we're going to be talking about. How do you use these from an actual messaging standpoint? We're laying the groundwork, then we're going to start putting into action next week. All right. Good, we've got more questions coming. There's some longer ones here. Gary's saying, we have found quite a variety of journey maps. We incorporate the entire faith in different sized bites with different communication approaches based on mission, persona groups, but I think we need more practice in 2 areas. Healthy brainstorming and planning evaluation into our goals. Your thoughts? Well, I have a lot of thoughts, and I could probably talk far longer than I should on both of these topics. But I think both of those things, healthy brainstorming and planning evaluation, are really good to establish schedules. Now, that doesn't mean you do the same thing every time, but what we have done in our church for ministry goals is we've said we're going to have what we call critical targets, which are broader areas. They do not meet the SMART goal criteria of being specific and measurable. They are broad categories, and we're going to establish those every 2 years. And sometimes we may just reaffirm them and keep the same critical targets for the next 2 years. But we're at least every 2 years going to evaluate that. And during that time, we'll go through some different brainstorming things, and we don't always use the same ones. And then ministry goals, we're going to go through every year. We're going to have new ministry goals for each fiscal year. We do it on a July to June basis. And so we know we have that schedule in place. We know it's coming up. How we go about doing it will change, but it's keeping us constantly thinking. And it's not so far off that people are changing and forgetting things. We're doing it every 1 and then 2 years for critical targets. So I'll leave it at that. I could go much farther if I had the time. I'm already well past time though, but it looks like we still have a lot of people here. Karen saying, when formulating multi-layer journey maps, how do we prevent the idea of spreading ourselves too thin? From experience in other courses on organization planning that I've attended, this can be a concern. How do we recognize this concept of extending further than we should? Or is this an issue when organizing and executing the journey map? Well, you have to look at your context and what resources you have available. And I know for those of you who are the one person doing this, this will be quickly overwhelming. And that's where I'll take you back to that primary point. These are tools. Let me pull that up. These sessions provide tools for creating a strategy at your church. There's a lot that you can do here. And I'm not saying you have to do all of this to take these principles and apply them to your context. If all you're doing is understanding that the timing of achieving a goal will influence your communication, you don't have to have that all planned out visually. That will improve your communication in and of itself when you say, I'm not going to send this message to this person because I understand it's not going to be relevant for them. If that's all you take away, that's great. Now, if you have the time to dig deeper, or if you say, I'm going to do this later on, I'm going to start with personas, I may be sending the message to everybody, but I'm going to send it in different ways to different people. Well, that's a step in the right direction. So do what you can, understand that these are tools to help you get to that point, but you don't have to do it all at once. Every little step helps to get the right message to the right person at the right time. All right, next up, this will probably start to put me in sales mode, so I won't say too much about it, but Mark is saying, is 360 members a good way to track progression through stages via tags for each? There's a number of tools within Church 360 members that you can use for that. And I could talk about that all day, but I don't want to make this a sales pitch. Any good church management software will allow you to do these things. It may look different, but it will allow you to do these tracking. So if you're using Shepherd Staff, our other software, it doesn't have that concept of tags, but it has static lists and dynamic lists. So yeah, a good church management software will allow you to do this, and I consider Church 360 members a good church management software. Let's see. I'm gonna pick and choose a few of these. I may follow up with you later on or put these in the group. What do you call the upper line of stage items, visitors, potential members, etc., versus the lower bar stage? So Patricia's asking that. Let me go back here and I'll explain that just a little bit more. The words that I use to describe them is that the bottom is actions. These are the things you're encouraging your audience to do. Whereas the top are the stages. This is the placement where they're at. So every stage has a corresponding previous action and a corresponding next action, but they're different. The stage is where people are at. The actions are what you're asking them to do. So I hope that explains that a little bit more. All right, we are coming close on 20 minutes, so I'm going to wrap up in just a few, maybe one or two more questions. Ron is asking, Ronald is saying, does the journey map work two ways with a possible change in an individual's communication persona? Well, I think that really comes down to how you divide up your personas, how you distinguish your personas. But I think what you bring up is a good point, is that personas can change. Now, certainly your journey map can change too, but a person who, well, if you have personas based on communication preferences and an individual's communication preferences have changed, well, then you move them into a different persona. Just like with demographics, if you have people in demographic personas, they're going to age. Now, that may mean that you just change your personas as people age. Your millennial Melody now may be a middle-aged Melody who has kids. Given enough time, people are going to progress. So that's why there is that regular evaluation, because it's not going to be true for all times. But I think that's where, if you regularly evaluate them, looking at them at least once every few years, but I recommend on an annual basis, part of your regular planning. You don't have to go through the whole process every year, but just evaluating it. That's going to help keep things appropriate. All right, let's see. I'm going to take this one last question. It's a little bit longer, but then we'll wrap up from here. If I'm understanding the process, you've discussed that the journey map starts from the mission and the goals of the congregation, or rather we start with the mission goals. Then we construct the personas, then journey maps of our members based on those personas. My question, is it ever the case that once you've constructed the journey map and plugged in your members, that the goals actually change? In other words, the congregation had ideas, then realized they weren't really the congregation to complete the ideas based on the members they presently have. Still could be considered a win because we have clarification of the process provided. Karen, I think you're absolutely right. That could change your goals after you go through it. And that's why I say the ideal path. Because if you were looking at the ideal path for achieving those goals and you realize, this is the best possible solution and we can't achieve that, then yeah, the clarification has occurred. I think it's okay to change the goals. What I would say is then those goals were not realistic, and therefore they were not really smart goals because they didn't meet all the criteria. And so you can reevaluate them. The best thing to do with that is to be open and clear with your congregation. And that's one of the things we talked about at church council last night. We have some ministry goals that we're not going to hit. Now, we're not going to hit some of them because of the coronavirus. It dealt with having some in-person events this spring, which we can't have anymore. And we can clarify that. But if you come and say, well, we're not going to hit these goals because they were too aggressive, well, great. You'll have a better understanding for next year. Again, it's all about that progress. It's certainly not about perfection. We're never going to be perfect in this world. But if you are making progress, clarification will help provide that progress. In a similar way, if you go through this process, you create a journey map and you realize a persona doesn't fit at all, You can evaluate the personas. That goes back to my main point. These are tools. These are not rules. You don't have to do everything that's here. You can admit when you've gone down a wrong path, but if it helps you get further to more contextualized communication, which is getting the right message to the right audience at the right time, well, great. It's a learning process. I don't want you to feel like this is a burden on any of these things. It's all about moving things forward. All right, with that, I'm going to wrap up because I am starting to lose my voice. So next week, let me go down back to this again. Content maps. Next Tuesday, May 19th, join us. I will be sending out the recording and tomorrow, and I'll send you a reminder about this next Tuesday. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of the day.